Doug Wright, covering Utah's biggest stories, breaking Utah's biggest stories on KSL News Radio.
What an interesting day. We're all keeping a very, very close eye on the Supreme Court today. I appreciate Paul Edwards joining us, editor of the Deseret News this morning, to walk through some of the issues at hand here and with his legal background. And speaking of legal background and also status in the United States Senate, I'm very pleased that Senator Mike Lee could join us. His experience, too, in the courts, having clerked for Justice Alito. And Mike, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Doug. It's great to be with you as always.
First of all, since you're right back there where all the action is, are you hearing any vibes out of the court?
You know, I'm not hearing anything yet. Nobody's come out of the courtroom yet, and I wasn't there. But based on what I've read from the briefing, I'm optimistic that this will be a good day for religious liberty in America, and that the 10th Circuit's ruling in support of religious freedom will be affirmed.
It's interesting. We have it on this front right now through the Affordable Care Act. We also have it on the front of gay marriage and gay rights. And I noticed, and of course was aware that you have introduced an act. You did this last, December. You and 11 original co-sponsors introduced legislation protecting religious organizations from discrimination by the federal government for supporting traditional marriage. The issue today is more in the line of the Affordable Care Act, but we are seeing these two pathways now that are heading to the Supreme Court, and it creates a most interesting environment back there, and it all weighs on religious liberty.
That's exactly right, Doug, and these are important issues. You mentioned my Marriage and Religious Freedom Act, which I introduced a few months ago with some of my Senate colleagues, the purpose of which is to protect religious Americans from any retaliation by the government based on their religious belief on what constitutes a marriage. And you're right to draw a parallel between them, because in that circumstance, and in this case, the one that was argued before the Supreme Court of the United States today, we're dealing with the rights of individual Americans to exercise their own religion as they seem fit without undue interference by the federal government. What's before the court deals with that issue, and what my Marriage and Religious Freedom Act deals with that issue as well, just in different contexts.
I know you're a great lover of and student of history, and I love our history too. And it's interesting. I always try to weigh this because, anytime religious or liberties are expanded for anyone, it will tend to cause some abrasion. We actually talked about this last week. And some of that is just natural. Others seems to be really invasive. And you look at history, and many times when we have made what now in hindsight looks like just clear progressive, movements towards a more perfect union, at the time seemed to really rub up and be abrasive to religion. Is this different today? Is there a different abrasion that is happening, Mike?
Yes, it's different in the sense that the government is getting bigger and bigger. Its footprint is being noticed a lot more because of its sheer magnitude. And so sometimes I analogize the growth of government to Godzilla in the sense that, if Godzilla is roaming around your town and he steps on your house, it's not necessarily because Godzilla hates you and wants to go after you. It's not necessarily because Godzilla is hungry and wants to eat you. It might just be because he's Godzilla and he's huge and your house happens to be in the way. This is the sort of thing that happens. Our religious freedoms will end up becoming incidental victims of a big government that knows no boundaries on its own authority.
We hear a lot of lip service. I played a soundbite from President Obama speaking of the National Prayer Breakfast, and boy, there just seems on all sides of this absolute respect for, adherence of, love of, and willingness to stand up for religious freedoms, but yet we continue to have these abrasions, is the term that I've been using. As you analyze, especially the case today, since that happens to be in the headline, and those oral arguments did just literally end 25 minutes ago, you've been in the court, you've clerked in the court, and you mentioned that you hope this would be a good day for religious liberties. With the decision, though, that came down on DOMA, and this legislation, the Religious Freedoms Reformation Act, came down in the same era, 1993 versus 1996. When you analyze what the court did in DOMA, is that a precursor in any way, Mike, to what could happen today?
I don't think so, and I think the Religious Freedom Restoration Act will not only be upheld, but I think it will be applied in this case in a way that will strengthen and bolster the religious liberty claims of the plaintiffs in this case. There isn't any constitutional argument against RFRA. The question here is whether or not it ought to apply, whether or not it does apply in this circumstance so as to protect a religious employer in that religious employer's right to say, I'm not going to engage in practices that I consider offensive to my religious beliefs just because the government wants me to. That's really all that's at issue here. And so RFRA does not stand to be eviscerated in the same way that DOMA was eviscerated last summer.
There's an interesting argument that's going around, and some of it coming from the government, that if indeed corporation entities are deemed to be people, which, the argument can be made, and certainly the Supreme Court made that decision when it comes to political donations and funding PACs and things of that nature, but also that with the entity itself can have religious views and exercise the religious freedoms. Some are wondering how far this could go. If it, right now it's about certain types of, not all, but certain types of contraception. Well, if somebody had the belief that all contraception, which many Catholics, of course, do, or if someone was not for vaccinations, believed that that was an infringement on their religious liberties. We've had religious organizations out of Colorado who have said that blood transfusions violate their religious freedoms. Where could this go, Mike? Where do you see this going?
Well, one of the things that we have to remember is that we live in a pluralistic society, one that is dedicated to the cause of protecting religious liberty, to protecting the free exercise of religion. The fact that the plaintiffs in this case have a very good argument, one that I think will prevail, the fact that they've got a good argument and are likely to win in this case doesn't mean that all of a sudden the floodgates are going to come down and that our laws are going to be eroded. We've been a country for well over 2 centuries now, and we've survived very well while respecting, on a case-by-case basis, religious freedoms. And those religious freedoms, when they intersect with the law, are analyzed on a case-by-case basis to determine whether or not the religious belief needs to trump the government interest at stake. And most of the time, we respect religious freedom.
Senator Lee, just a final quick question. Since you have actually clerked, you've seen the court, behind the curtain that none of us will likely ever see. What's happening today? What role do the justices play? Are they being devil's advocate? Can you read the tea leaves? And after everything's said and done, what happens in the back room as they're discussing these things?
So when I was a law clerk to Justice Alito and watched the court at its argument, I could often tell, not all the time, but much or most of the time, I could tell which way each justice was leaning based on not only the questions that each justice would ask, but also based on the facial expressions, the cadence and the intonation of their speech while they were asking those questions. In many circumstances, I could discern which way the case was likely to be decided. And I suspect that those watching today, if they knew what to look for, would be able to make a prediction. I suspect that what we're going to hear from the court watchers who were in the courtroom today is that there will be a solid majority, at least 5, possibly 6 or 7, maybe even 8, who are going to be inclined to affirm what the 10th Circuit has said, which is that we're going to respect the religious freedom of the plaintiffs in this case, and we're not going to let the government tell them that they have to contradict or violate their sincerely held religious beliefs.
Boy, this will be interesting to watch, and just watching it unfold to this point. Senator Lee, I always appreciate your viewpoints, and I thank you for joining us today in a very, very busy schedule. And with all of this unfolding, we'll likely be calling you again.
I look forward to that. Thank you very much, Doug.
Thanks so much. Senator Mike Lee with us here at KSL News Radio. Especially valuable to talk with Senator Lee today with his background having clerked for Justice Alito. And most people are thinking this is going to be fairly close. I don't know if maybe it could go up to an 8-1 decision or whatever. But if it is a 5-4 decision, if it's very close, a lot of people think that it will boil down to